Hi everyone. My name is Ian Brown. So if you're here for the first time, we've had ongoing webinars, and what we're going to do is do what we normally do, and that is to introduce you to some fun activities that you can do with your child while you're at home. Something which is reasonably simple, so you don't need lots and lots of resources. We're going to actually talk a little bit about theory, which is really good for parents to have a background in, because it's just some important things to know about. And today's topic is going to be sort of looking at, is my child the same as other children, and where should they be? And, you know, way back when I first started this series, which was about, 8 weeks ago, one of the first questions I got was, my child is still scribbling, and he's nearly 3 years old, and is that something he should be doing with his art, or should he be doing something different by this stage? So we're going to have to spend a whole session just sort of looking at the developmental theory and creative theories, and look and see where your child fits within that. So we're going to look at some activities that you might be able to do with your child at home. Simple ones, some nice, really creative art activities. Then we're going to actually have a look at some developmental theory, but I'm going to actually reverse the way that I normally do things, because normally I start with the activity and then I go to a bit of theory, and then I go to what we call voices of children. I'm going to turn it on its head today, and we're going to actually sort of start with something about the Voices of Children project. Now, I've been pushing for the last couple of weeks, the idea of actually getting parents to upload some images or some pictures that their children have taken using their either their iPad or their computer or their digital camera, or the camera on their phone, which is the one that most children are able to use these days. And we're going to actually put those images together and look at it. And so every week I've been giving a different topic, and there's a worksheet that I put up each week. And the first page of the worksheet describes the art activity that we do and the bit of theory that we talk about with parents. The second sheet is about the Voices of Children project, and I'll come back to that one. But today what we're going to do is the theme, why I'm turning this on its head, is that the theme that we're going to start with the Voices of Children for this week is about identity. Now, we didn't quite get up to that last week because we had so much happening. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about identity, and I would like to actually explore some themes with you, because it's really important. It's a developmental stage and an important part of what children go through as they're starting to grow from being a baby until they're becoming an adult. So let's start with just the first video if we can, and we'll just have a quick look at that. And it talks about identity in UAE, and just see if there's some things there. So I'll have the first video. Thanks.
سبعة خطوط ترسم خارطتنا تحكي ألوان علمنا، 7 مؤسسين، 7 إمارات و7 منارات، خطوط تعكس وضوح الهدف وتصاعد الطموح. الإمارات، لا شيء مستحيل.
الإمارات نغني للإمارات، بدون الأمجاد فيها للإمارات، والإبداع بنيها للإمارات، ولما شدت على الرمل فيها أيدي الهناء. الإمارات نغني للإمارات التي صارت منارة، تبسم الأرض لأهلها اضطرارا، بابتهاج وبوجه عربي القسمات. الإمارات نغني للإمارات، الف لا 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 بل الف لا الف لا الف لا 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 بل الف لا مستحيل.
الإمارات، لا شيء مستحيل.
Okay, So that was a nice little introduction to the identity and what does it mean in the United Arab Emirates. And now I'm going to actually just share my screen so we could talk a little bit about what, and I'll come back to that video at the end, but I want to talk to you a little bit about what does identity mean for young children? And if you've got a baby that's growing up, or if you've got some young children growing up, what does it mean for them? So I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll go to a PowerPoint, and we'll share that one. We'll take the first one here. Oops. And hopefully this is going to work. Okay, so what do we mean by identity? I mean, what does it mean for your child, and what does it mean for their place in the world? In other words, what we're suggesting is that the first thing that this is from the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, and what they're saying is that children need to have a positive self-view of themselves. For them to be able to be successful in learning and be able to be successful in engaging with people, they have to have a positive view, and they've got to understand what a positive view is. And the nice thing about it is to get this positive view and to be able to understand themselves and to grow up in a healthy, socially, emotional way, they need to actually understand people. And you as a parent, educators are there, and that's their role, is to do this, but parents play the main significant role in forming a positive view of themselves. And what we're hoping in the long run is that children should be able to influence the world as they grow up. They can do that, and they should be able to do that. So if you think about identity and the place of the world, children have a right to an education. And so what it does is that they have the right for their respect from their family, and they have cultural and other identities and languages that they need to actually develop. And so it's the role of the family to help them with their culture, and it's the role of the family to help them build their identity, and it's the role of the family to help them develop their language. Where does your child sit with this? And where are they at the moment? Do they understand what it is to be part of a culture? Do they understand what it is to be happy and growing and be educated in that culture? So what is identity? Very, very quickly, I'm not going to dwell on it, but children learn about themselves and they construct their own identity with the context of families and their communities. It's not a fixed thing, it's shaped. So in other words, they're not just born with identity. The only way that they can form an identity is have the experiences, and their families can help them with that. So they need to have lots and lots of positive experiences. Creative arts, the visual arts, is one way to give them these positive experiences. So what we're hoping then, that they will feel respected and that they will have a sense of belonging in this world. Strong identity is underpinned by the sense of belonging. They need to belong to a culture. They need to feel worth. They need to be respected. And so they need to have, over time, they're going to have lots of different, multiple shifting identities as they're going through. So as a parent, how can you actually help them? How can you help them to get a strong sense of identity? How can you help them to be knowledgeable about themselves? How do you get them to be confident about that? Parent and educators play a significant role in assuring a child's positive identity. A positive identity can help children be resilient and be emotionally stable. So you need to be a co-constructor of that identity. And so what can you do with your child to actually make them feel positive and actually make them look towards themselves? So co-construction is something that you and them can do together. So lots of children come from lots of different backgrounds, and I know that in your part of the world, you're made up of a diversity of different sorts of cultures. But if I had to ask you the question, what is your culture? Or if you were able to say to your child, what is your culture? What is it that they would be able to talk about? So what is it what heritages or traditions do you have? What do their grandparents do? What do you think culture might be? Is it religion? Is it a tradition? Is it their clothes that they wear? Is it the language, or is it things, or is it music? There's lots of different things. So you need to actually explore some activities with your child to actually get them to understand what their culture is and what their identity might be. So if that's the case, let's think about it in terms of getting children to take some photographs for this wonderful exhibition that we're going to have. And if you sat your child down and you said to them, look, I want you to take some pictures that tell me something about you. What is it about you that is different to other children? And that might be that it's to do with their family. It may be to do with the type of house that they live in. It might be to do with their religion. If religion is a very strong thing within their family, then it may be something to do. So if you said to your child, look, if we were going to take 5 photographs that explain to another child in another country what your identity is, what 5 photographs would you take? Would you take something about their clothes? Are the clothes that they wear different to a child in another country? The house that they live in, is it possible that the house is quite different? What about their religion? Those beautiful mosques, if you come from a Muslim religion, or if you come from a Christian religion, or whatever it might be. So there's ways to sit down and talk about it with a child. And it's a really nice family activity to actually sit there with your family and actually have a chat about what makes you you. So if I just very quickly, I'll whiz off this one again and share my screen, and we'll go down to this one. Let me just try that one. I'll do that one. Sorry, team, and I'll come back to you. Share my screen. This one. Okay, share this. This is the worksheet that I sent to you, and then we put up onto the thing. And on the second page, if we come down here, this is all the stuff that we'll be talking about in a moment about the sorts of art activity. But if I come down here, here's the second page, and here's the things that we would like you to start collecting photographs and getting your child to take pictures of. And you'll notice that this week is week 8. And what we've got here is that we want children to take pictures with their iPads, with their iPhones and their digital cameras about my identity. And then we're going to put all of those things together with, and hopefully if you've been following and you've been doing this, then you might have 8 weeks of different photos, images that your child has taken. And we're going to put it into this Voices of Children international project, and your child can be part of that. And they will send you the link. The link will arrive, and you can actually start to upload those photos. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about identity and the sorts of things that you're trying to do. Now, every week we try to give you some really fun activities to do with your child. And so what we're going to do today, and the other one that I really like to do with younger children, and I like to do with all kids, whether primary age kids or secondary children or whatever, is to try and think of some type of artist that you might actually work with, so that the children are getting some ideas and they're motivated by real artists, and then they're going to do some sort of activity. And again, it's been very lucky here because we have a public holiday here in Australia at the moment. So I've been able to get my grandchildren down. They've been here at my house, and we've been doing some activities, some fun activities, creative and visual arts activities with them. And they're ones that I think that you might like to be able to do with your child. And again, they're things that aren't, heavily resources, things that you can find at home, and then maybe use some videos or things to stimulate them. So today, the artist that we're going to look at is Paul Klee. Now, Paul Klee is an artist that on the worksheet it will tell you that he's an artist that comes from a Swiss and German background. And he did just very simple shapes, and children love his work because they can relate to it, and can see things in the artworks that are very similar to the things that they can produce. So what we did today is that we actually did a collage, and I'll show you that in a moment, how we did it. But let's have a look at, first of all, I've got two little videos that I want to show you. So let's start with number 2 on my list, the Paul Klee Build a Castle one, and that'll explain the type of artworks he does. Thank you. We'll have the second video now.
The cities are worth a visit too. In particular, I'd like to show you a dreamy city in a sleepy glow and a castle colourful as a rainbow.
Okay, so that little video is on YouTube, and it's called Paul Klee, Explore Art Klee, Build a Castle. So what's nice about that, that's designed not for adults. In actual fact, it's designed for children. So and the little cat that appears is a little cat that he has in his paintings quite often. So what's nice about this one is that it's all about shapes. All right, so it's what we did with my granddaughter was that we looked at it in terms of squares and rectangles and triangles and how we put those things together. So he does these cityscapes, which are really nice, solid sort of blocks, and give you the impression that was a castle. And they also, when you actually discuss this with your children, you find that, like Riley was sort of talking to me and she sort of said, oh, I think it looks like a city, because it sort of looks like streets and things. So the two things that we did. So what I decided to do was we watched that little video, and I'm going to show you another one in a moment. And what we did then was that we actually made collage out of them. And a collage is just cut shapes. And so I cut the shapes up for them. They could cut them themselves if they're okay. And I just cut up a whole series of rectangles and a whole series of triangles and squares. And then we talked about squares and rectangles and how we could put them together to actually form the city. So I'm just going to show you a bit of the next video. And it's one which is sort of a cartoon one. Now, both of the videos my grandchildren enjoyed. They just sat there and watched them. And I used that as the beginning, you know, the launching part to actually get them into doing their creative activity afterwards. So we just sat and watched the videos, and they were lovely, and it was really good. And then we had a bit of knowledge about the artist. So we'll just have the third one now, the art with Marty and Dada.
Paul Klee.
Hey, Maddie, do you want to make puppets with me? And then we can put on a puppet show.
I'd love to, Dada. But first, I want to do a painting about the dream I had last night. I dreamed you and I were flying over a river and trees.
Ooh, sounds like a fun dream.
Yes, but I can't figure out how to do the painting, how to get everything in it.
I was just reading a book about an artist who made puppets. And he also did paintings about his dreams.
Paul Klee. A painting of a cat? I wonder if he dreamed about a cat.
Let's go find out!
But I was just about to start my paint.
Wow!
Whoa! We're definitely in an artist's studio. Oh! There's something strange about this studio.
There sure is. Maddie, whoa! Puppets! And they're moving on their own! Very strange!
Have you seen a cat? I'm looking for my cat. Impossible. My drawing has escaped from the paper. Something very strange is going on today.
We think so too.
Da-da strange! Da-da wow! Floating fish swimming in the air!
Mr. Klee, you have the most unusual studio ever!
It's not usually like this.
These are your puppets? And they can fly! It's like we're in a dream!
Dreams, of course. I bet I'm having a dream right now. I must be inside the dream.
Duh! I think we're inside Paul Klee's dream. You were talking about dreams as we came here.
Da-da. Oops. Maddie wanted to see how Paul Klee painted dreams, and I wanted to see your puppets. The puppets!
Dreams can inspire by painting, but so does music and going places.
So you paint whatever you feel like?
Yes, but I don't paint at random. I have rules of composition.
Rules of composition?
In every painting, there are some hidden lines that make it balanced.
That sounds difficult.
Yes, if you think about it. But no, if the balancing lines are in your artist's eye. What could be more balanced than eyes? One on each side. So now, I must balance these. So what if I paint in eyeballs that point in opposite directions?
That's balanced.
And then I paint the sides of the cat's face and ears. And then for more balance, we have the cat's nose right in the middle.
Losing my balance! I found my balance!
And that was how you made this painting? With balance?
Yeah, but it is like music. Not all the notes balance together. They are often different. In artwork, balance does not mean making both sides the same. It means harmonious, like a piece of music. All the different parts working together. The hidden lines in the painting are very simple, and they help to fill the whole canvas.
And the oval shapes of the eyes. And the ears up the top sides like triangles. And the nose is also shaped like a triangle.
And then I put a bird at the top.
It looks like the only thing on that cat's mind is the bird.
And with the heart nose, I feel like the cat is happy that he likes the bird.
Ah, my cat, Fritzy. Have you seen him anywhere?
I'm looking for Fritzy. It's a puppet of you. I'll help you look for your cat.
And this painting, it looks like a chessboard. It's a whole bunch of squares inside a big square.
In this, I painted a regulated succession of strong and weak elements. I call this painting in rhythm. This painting can be sung like a waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Sorry about that. That went a little bit longer than I was expecting it to go for, but that's fine. You got the idea, but this is a little cartoon that talks about the artist Paul Klee, and you'll notice that in the background there were lots of little squares and triangles and things like that, which is signature of the type of paintings that he does. And so what as I said, what we did was that we sat, watched and had a look at that, and you can watch the whole thing. It goes for about 7 minutes. The children quite enjoyed it. They just sat there and watched it, and then we talked then about the sorts of artworks. What I'll do now, and hopefully it will work, is that I put together a little MP4 which shows the whole process that we went through. And what I tried to do with that is that we started with collage. So we glued and we stuck things on and recreated the sort of castle scene or the city scene. And then I like to actually extend it a little bit further. So what we then did was that we actually did some drawings and we drew over the top of it. And the children actually quite enjoyed that. So the collage isn't just the one thing. The whole process was about collage, and then we did some drawings. And then finally what we did is we did a little bit of printing. And by this stage, I mean, I put all three things together, but you could actually do them over a period of time. And then we actually printed, and I got little shapes, foam blocks, they're little makeup ones. And we used those because they were similar shapes that were in his painting. So let's have a look at the MP4 and you'll see the whole process take place. Okay, so that was our little activity that we did this week, and that takes you right through from when we used an artist, Paul Klee. We looked at his work, we had a look at a couple of little videos. We then talked about what it was made from. It was shapes, tends to be rectangles and then squares and triangles, and then we built it up, did a collage, followed that by some drawing, followed that by some printing. And so it's a nice little simple activity that you could do at home. You don't need very many resources and it works quite well. So we've had a little bit about identity. We've had a little bit about our voices and children and uploading those photographs, which we'd really like you to do. We've had an art activity, which is a collage activity based on an artist's work. And now I just want to talk to you a little bit about the topic about stages of development and what does that mean. And so what I'll do is I'll just share my screen now with and show you another, whoa, I'll just get rid of that one. And we'll go to this one, sorry about that. Okay, so what we're talking about here is the stages of creative development. It's an important thing for parents to actually understand what your child goes through and the sorts of things that the stages that they're doing. Now, what you have to remember to start off with is that children are really creative beings before we get there. You don't need to do anything. They're innately creative from an early age. They're able to express themselves. That little image that I've got on the screen here now, that's a very young child's image. And you'll notice that I'm going to go through the stages with you very quickly, but you'll notice on that one stage, we've got scribbling up in the top, and then at the bottom of it, we've got some lovely photographs, which is probably mum and dad, I would imagine, because they tend to be, like to draw families to start off with. Children use their emotions to be able to express their creativity. So that can be anything from scribbling to realistic images. So it's quite okay for kids to start off, and that's how they will start. They'll start with scribbling, it'll be quite random, and then they'll sort of move on. So creative experiences help promote children's mental health, their emotional health, their social and their physical development, because they've got to move their hands to make those wonderful marks. So mark making is an important and natural unfolding for children. And so what I said here was that as parents, you need to fire up your children's imagination. The more you can do that, the better. So what do we expect to see from this is creative development, or this is development in general. From ages 1 to 2, what we need to do is we need to observe the world. We need to learn about, children can do this at this point. They understand their senses. So they know touch and they know taste and they know they can hear things. They can notice colors and shapes and patterns, and they can take part in some sort of creative play. And they can use non-verbal communication. So at this point, this is 1 to 2. They use gestures and facial expressions. They can certainly tell you when they're happy, and they can certainly tell you when they're not happy. So age 3, this is when they're able to use representational thought. So representational thought is them being able to actually understand what something represents, whether a dog is a dog and what does a dog look like, or whereas a house is what it might be. They're able to make representations, so they could actually draw a little tree. They could actually, the tree is probably going to only have a trunk and it's going to have a circle on the top, but they know that it's a tree. Or if they were going to build with blocks, they could build a house, and they can actually draw with intention. They will start at this age to do these things. At age 4, children can create their own stories. They can start to act out sort of little dramatic scenes if they want to. And if you sit them and listen to them, if you step back from them, they will actually have little discussions with themselves, or they can actually work in groups together, and they will tell stories, and they can start to build upon that. And age 5, they start to construct things which are much more realistic. And they add much more detail to their work. If they're doing drawings, they'll have detail. they'll start to master those fine motor skills. So it's not a matter of just huge, big scribbles. Now, if I'm going to get them to scribble at age, 1 or 2, then you need nice big pieces of paper where they can actually scribble, not tiny little bits and pieces. They can actually add words to their pictures, and they'll also notice and talk about differences. So if we're going to talk about art development and stages of art development, then you'll find different ones from different places, but generally Lowenfeld was it was the person who actually developed these, and he came up with 5 stages. In actual fact, there's a 6th one, which is an older stage, but generally when you're talking about younger children, they talk about 5 stages of development. So let's have a look at them and see, where does your child fit with this? Have you got a young one at the moment who's 1, 2, 3? And then you'll find that they're probably at the scribble stage. And what that means, and what I've got there is it says, this is between 2 and 4, and then I've got in brackets 18 months and 3 years. Well, what's interesting here is that one of the things with the developmental stages is that there's a huge range. They can go anywhere from 2 years to 4 years within this one. So they learn something about scribbling, random scribbles. So this doesn't actually mean anything. It's just on the page. They move their hand and they do nice scribbles. They do it on the wall sometimes, which you don't want them to do, but scribbling is an important part of it. Sometimes they can name it. Sometimes they can say, oh, that's dad, that's mum, that's a dog, that's the tree, whatever it might be. But it's also good for their hand-eye coordination. Now, pre-schematic stages is the 2nd stage. And this is somewhere between 3 and 7 years, but it tends to be about 3 to 4 years. And this is where children start to draw their first symbols. So in other words, the lines start to look like squares or circles and triangles. And most children will start going from a line with a scribble and then start to turn it into a circle. So if you check and have a look at your child, if you've got a child that's about 2 to 3, and see if they're actually moving from scribbles into circles. The drawings are a little bit more complex, and sometimes they do simple people with simple features. And the other thing is that objects that they do float around in space. All children work through this stage, and they start with tadpole people. So in other words, they have circles and they will put eyes onto them, and they might not have any hands, they might not have any legs. And sometimes if they're at the end of this pre-schematic stage, they'll start to draw something like, they might draw a bus, and inside the bus will be people. So you can actually see into it. So we call these X-ray drawings. And often this is what you will find your children are doing. The schematic stage is somewhere between 6 and 11. So this is where children learn how to use symbols to identify things. And so then, in other words, a house looks like a house, and a building looks like a building, and a car looks like a car. People become a little bit more proportional and a bit more detailed, and they have some basic designs or schemas to, and they come a little bit repetitive. So colours will become more realistic. They will actually choose blue for the sky, and they'll choose green for the grass, or they use yellow for the desert, or whatever it might be. And they have a ground line and a skyline to appear. I've got some examples I'm going to show you. The transitional stage is about 9 to 11, and their artworks become much more detailed. They're a bit more detailed than what they're doing. But sometimes children can get frustrated at this stage because it doesn't look exactly like they want it to look. They're trying to draw a horse and it doesn't look like a horse. And they'll often say, they'll often say, I can't draw at this stage, where you know that they can. And then the realism stage is from about 12 on. And the interesting thing about the realism stage is most of us don't get past this stage. So quite often I talk to adults, and adults will say, I'm not very good at drawing. So if we have a look at the one on the left, this is a very typical drawing of a young child who's just moved out away from the scribbling stage. And you'll notice that they use all of the page. that the legs just drop down, and I'm sure if you've got a child, you'll recognize these. But so they go from scribbling to starting those circles, and they're called mandalas. And when they start that circle, then people start to appear. Now, the one on the right has got much more detail, and you can see the difference. Children sometimes don't worry about the direction or the perspective. And this is a really interesting one. And I love it when children do this, and they will actually draw a baseline. And then the baseline can actually be at the top of their drawing as well. So they know that they've got to ground their drawing and put them onto the ground, but sometimes they just go that way as well. I'm just going to, okay, if we have a look at these very quickly, you'll notice that, wait till I just escape for a moment. Okay, I just want to see my timing and I'll go back to that one. All right, so if we have a look at this one, what we've got here is the top one is typical of what children do after they move out of that scribbling stage. And you'll notice there's a bit of a scribble on the top, which is the rainbow. And then you'll notice, and what tends to happen is that they don't care how long the arms or the legs are, as long as it fills the page. Now, if we drop down and look at the one below that, we've got a rainbow as well. And the sun appears. Now, this is really interesting because what children do naturally with the sun is the sun will appear in the middle of the page. And then as they get a little bit older, it will start to move across the page over to the right or possibly to the left. And then what will happen is if you look at the drawing on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that there's only a partial sun there. Now, if you've got children who are about 8 or 9, this is the way they start to draw the sun. They just start to move it off the page. And we can actually look at children's drawings and discover when the sun appears, as it has on that bottom left-hand one. And then as it starts to move across the page and off the page, it'll disappear up into that corner. And then the next thing that they start to draw is that they will start to draw shadows. And there won't be a sun there, which means the sun has moved off the page and the shadow has appeared. But what's important about this one, and I wanted to talk about the one on the right-hand side, is the overlapping. This is a stage when your child starts to move from having things flat, taking up space, until they start to now overlap their drawings. And you can see that that's much more complex, the one on the right, because the tree is overlapping the fence, the grass is on the ground. And then if we just go to this one, here's the one, an interesting one to show how people start to appear and how much detail that there is. And you'll notice that they draw families all the time. The bottom one on the right-hand side, you can see the little guy floating up in the air. That will be the person who has actually done this drawing. All the people down the bottom will be in proportion. It'll be mum, it'll be dad, it'll be brother, it'll be sister. And then generally the person who's doing the drawing tends to be either floating around somewhere. If you look at the one above, mum and dad are in the right proportion, they're taller, and then the brothers and sisters are smaller. And so that tends to happen from a very early age. The one down in the bottom corner, they're all of the same age. So you could probably work out where your child sits. Are they at the transitional stage? Are they at the schematic stage? Or are they pre-schematic stage? Here's another one showing the suns. Have a look at them. The sun in the middle, that's where they appear when children are young. And then they move up the page, off the page, up into the corners. Quite interesting. So let me come back. All right, so we've just got a couple of minutes left. And so what's important about stages of development, and what happened was that when the theorists talked about children's stages of development, they saw them as being, age 2 to 4, this is what happens. Age, 3 to 5, this is what happens. Age 6 to 7, this is what happens. Over time, people have looked much more close and done a lot more research about it. And they've looked across different cultures. And this brings us back to our identity idea that we talked about right at the beginning. And the idea is that not all cultures do the same thing. I did my master's on children's drawing development, and I did a comparison between Australian children aged 8 and Vietnamese children aged 8. And when we actually looked in Australia, were about an 8-year-old according to the stages of development. The children in Vietnam, their drawings sat at about age 13, 14, 15. And it was because culturally they had been taught how to actually draw very, very well. So they were taught things like, this is how to draw eyes, this is how to draw hands, or whatever it might be. So culturally, it can be quite different. But don't panic if you look at those things today and say, oh, but wait a minute, my child's, he or she's 3 years old and they're still scribbling. That's the other thing about stages of development that you need to know, is that there's not necessarily a set age, but what is really interesting about the stages of development with children's art is that they go through it, okay? They don't jump, they don't start drawing, features on people and ears and eyes and nose and stuff. They don't. They will do scribbling. Then they will do a circle. And then the circle will turn into a body, and then they will have legs that drop down, and they will have arms that go right out to the outside edges. And they will do all of these different things. And so then they will move from that, and then they will start to do things like X-ray drawings where you can see into the house, or you can see into a bus. And then they move along, and then what happens is that then they start overlapping. And that's really interesting. That's an interesting phase when you actually look at your child and they're starting to put a tree in front of a fence, or they're putting a car in front of a house. And then that's when things start to make sense. And I'm sure you've noticed that you'll get a child that will actually put, a green grass right along the bottom of their drawing, and then they'll put a big blue line across the top of their drawing, and that's the sky. And I used to try and get my children to sort of break out of that mold. And I would say to them, well, look, that's not where the sky is. The sky comes down and joins the baseline, and they would go, yeah. And then they would draw a line across the top, which was a blue, and a line across the bottom, which was green. So you're not going to change them, but they do, all children move through these stages with their drawings. So grab one of your child's drawings and see where they're at the moment. Are they at the transitional stage? Are they much earlier, or whatever? Looks like we might have run out of time. Thank you very much. Next week, I hope you can come back next week and you can we'll have a look at some other different sorts of art activities to do. Goodbye for now.